1 minute remaining.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. This is episode number 7 of the Cedar Public Access Channel. My name is Robert Lehman and I'm the marketing and booking manager for the Cedar. I just wanted to tell you a few things before we get started today, give you kind of an overview of what you're about to see and hear, and then just a little bit about how all of this exactly came to be. So in March of this year, Artist Collective member Ritika Ganguly, she was working with the Weisman Art Museum, and she was working on a project and got connected with Emily Baxter, who runs and founded We Are All Criminals, and Ritika was just really fascinated with Emily's project idea for Scene. We Are All Criminals is a nonprofit organization dedicated to challenging society's perceptions of what it means to be a criminal. Scene is a particular project that was created by Emily Baxter at We Are All Criminals, and it's in collaboration with the Minnesota Prison Writers Workshop, the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundations, and the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Now, this photography project specifically highlights the voices of incarcerated artists, and this particular iteration of the project is a collaboration with Weisman Art Museum, and it's focusing on 7 different incarcerated artists, pairing up with 7 artists on the outside to create in-person installations and works that will live at Weisman Art Museum. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, those exhibitions can't happen right now. Ritika came to us with the idea that maybe on the Cedar Public Access Channel, one of these episodes could be a window into just a small snippet of what this project is about. In this episode, you'll see 3 glimpses into these larger works in progress. The first one focuses on a poet B and his poem, We Can't Hear Ourselves Sing, and explores themes of noise and chaos of prison. His collaborator is Daniel McCarthy Clifford, and Daniel is doing the visuals. Now, Daniel is a formerly incarcerated artist himself, and he creates work that examines disciplinary structures in society. Next, you'll hear from visual artist and writer Sarith. As Sarith tells his story, choreographer Carl Flink unfolds a solo movement piece where he outlines the boundaries of Sarith's cell. Finally, you'll hear from Jeff, poet, musician, and journalist. He'll be talking with Korina Berry, who's a social worker, community organizer. This is part of a larger podcast. This specific segment of the podcast focuses on childhood trauma and then healing from that trauma. Each of the projects that you see today are just small glimpses into the larger projects that will continue to unfold. Please follow We Are All Criminals and Weisman Art Museum for updates on how those larger projects are shaping up. Before we get started with these projects and showing you them today, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context, paint a little bit of picture of the circumstances that these collaborations are taking place under. To get an idea of what these collaborations have been like, Ritika Ganguly set to interview each of the artists on the inside. Now, due to COVID, there are no visiting hours, and calls are unexpectedly dropped due to COVID outbreaks. Just this past week, at the Stillwater facility, there were 200 COVID cases and counting, and so no calls could be placed. As a result, Ritika was only able to interview one of the artists, B. I wanted to play you a little bit of a snippet from a conversation between her, B, and then the collaborating artist, Daniel.
An inmate at the Minnesota Department of Corrections Stillwater Correctional Facility. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using GTL.
Hello.
Hello.
Ritika?
Hi, B. This is Ritika. Thanks for calling.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Ritika goes on to ask B about the collaborative process, and we in turn hear a little bit from Daniel.
Well, obviously, as an inmate, we have our own subjective views of institutionalization. And my piece, that this particular piece sort of speaks to one of the aspects of dehumanization,
Right.
and sort of the process, that whole process of dehumanizing individuals who are incarcerated. And this is sort of for me, I like to write pieces like this to give the community outside of these walls sort of an idea of what the experiences are in there. And the best way that I think that can be appropriate is through art, is through a platform of art. Otherwise, it's kind of difficult to create a shared experience in any other way, or to express something poignantly, I guess, that'll be receptive. So yeah, I just felt like this piece in particular was a good way to fit into the idea of what we're trying to do, create this atmosphere of, okay, this is what it's like to be incarcerated, and this is one of the aspects of what incarcerated individuals have to deal with, which isn't corrective. You know, they call it the DLC, the Department of Corrections, but there's very little corrective things going on in a place like this. It's more retributive than corrective. It feels that way. There are little instances here and there of correctiveness, but for the most part, it just feels like when you are institutionalized, it's you're sort of thrown away and looked at as somebody sort of not, you're more of a number than a name. Yeah, and this is just kind of a look into that a little bit, a little peek into what this place is.
Yeah, and so how long do you actually get on a phone call when the call is placed from the prison? How long do you have to chat with Danny about things?
We have 15 minutes, which is, you can't really say a whole lot in 15 minutes, but
15 minutes at a time. Right.
Yeah, we try to make them as productive as possible. So.
Wow. And how often do you all speak to collaborate?
We've probably talked, I want to say 3 or 4 times in the past several months. Sometimes it's difficult. This environment in here is a little inconsistent. Sometimes I'm not able to call or able to do much communication, but we talked a few times.
What are you hoping that the audience take away from your offering?
Well, I think first off, I kind of want them to take away something, I don't know, I guess their own subjective feelings from the piece. I'm curious to know what this sort of inspires in them, whether it's feelings or ideas or thoughts or challenging their misconceptions, challenging the stereotypes. But because this piece is more speaking to a certain aspect of prison, which is this idea of noise and how it just bombards the senses. And so I guess I kind of want to give that experience to them, and have them feel a little bit of what it's like. And just that aspect, I felt that because this is so sensory dense, that would be the best way for a community member to experience just a small part of what it is to be an inmate, and the daily routines of being an inmate. So I'm hoping that it kind of, first and foremost, makes them question their ideas and preconceptions of incarceration and prisons, what happens, but at the same time, also want them to bring their own shared experiences to it, and to sort of inspire this idea of, every day is so full of noise in general, not just for inmates, but for most people in general. You're out there, you go to work, you come home, you're doing all these things, you very rarely have time to just sit back and enjoy the quiet. Quietness is a rarity, it seems like, nowadays. So, on a personal note, I kind of hope it inspires that in some people to be like, okay, well, maybe I need to take some time to myself sometimes and
Right.
experience that pastoral hush.
Yeah, so I just listening to what you were saying, I really do feel like the idea of, the concept of the poem and the theme, the aspect of incarceration that you're highlighting, which is the noise, you were spot on. So it's really like something that is super translatable to life on the outside as well, especially like right now. The news, you got the news and all the horrible news, not just news, often bad news, but I don't want to say nobody's taking time to be quiet and chill, because I don't know that. I don't know what everybody's doing, but I know I'm not. And so it's something like I can think about, and man, when I was incarcerated, like, I think probably the first few years, you don't have a moment of silence. So the first few years, I'm kind of going crazy and I don't realize it. And one day I got a pair of earplugs from someone, and I never took them out. I couldn't believe how nice it felt to just have quiet. So I would walk up and down the run with my earplugs in, which probably isn't the safest thing to do, but yeah, man, it's it's definitely a universal theme. And I think it, aside from the incarceration conversation, there's a conversation about sanity and wellness and taking care of your mind. And part of that is needing that calm, that pastoral hush that you talk about.
There were a lot of powerful insights in this conversation, and we're not going to include all of it here, but the full audio is in the show description. Before we finish up with this intro, Ritika asked one final question of the artists that I think has been on a lot of people's minds.
What for you is the role of art in our society today?
Man, that's a deep question. I think art.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Whether it's poetry or visual arts or music or dance, any kind of art. There's this quote by June Jordan, this poet and activist. She says, "Poetry is a political act because it involves telling the truth." And I think that is crucial, especially now, particularly in contemporary society, where not even the news can be trusted. And I think art is the best medium to express exactly what is going on candidly, and to put that experience out there for anybody who's either reading the poetry or seeing the art or experiencing any of that art form. They're able to get the truth. They're able to get the artist's view of truth, but they're also getting the truth of what is happening.
Thank you for using GTL. Hello, this is a prepaid call from at the Minnesota Department of Corrections, Stillwater Correctional Facility. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, hang up or press 1. To prevent calls from this facility, press 9. For a rate quote, press 8. Your current balance is $6.60. This call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording.
Can you hear that? The not silence. Shaking of the earth. The great grate of too many men contained in cramped quarters. Voice over voice as necks stretch and heads tip back in this feral nest, expecting to be fed or nurtured or shown the ritual of flight. You don't know noise until nerves sizzle and shock the body into short circuit. How much, too much, can you bear? The loudspeaker's constant God voice. The late night, early light, pill spiked grievance fevers of spook birds. The prison's dumb metal percussion drunk. The bang, flame, groaning bones, moans and walls, and throats, and the wind, and its baggage. God damn it, shut the fuck up. Figure fatigue of tongue would set in at some point. Enough for this poem to reach its final plea. Instead of rapture, a private view, pastoral hush.
While Ritika wasn't able to conduct interview with Sarith, we did capture a little bit of an interview that Ritika did with Emily Baxter, the executive director of We Are All Criminals, speaking about something that Sarith said. You can listen here.
Sarith, another artist who Ritika is kindly curating for the purposes of this project at the Cedar, he is a gentleman that survived the Khmer Rouge as a teenager. And he has this beautiful and heart-wrenching reflection from March when the pandemic first began. He told the story of when the Khmer Rouge came to his village, and he was at school at the time, he had biked to school, so he was not in the family home, but the Khmer Rouge came and people had to flee. Just like wildfire, you flee. There's no time to even grab shoes, or certainly no family photos, and you don't have time to round up kids who are not home. So the family that was there in the home fled. And Sarith said at one point, a few miles off, his father turned back round to go back home in this incredibly dangerous decision. He said that the family had kept pigs and that the pen was closed, the gate was locked. And his father realized that if no one opened that gate, the pigs would die, that there would be no one there to feed them, to care for them. And so they were better just trying to make it on their own in the middle of this war. And so Sarith said, you know, now that COVID is coming for us, like the Khmer Rouge came for family, who will be there to let us out? Who will remember us when COVID comes? And I think, you know, you see that time and again happening with a population that is so discarded, so dehumanized, so forgotten. And, you know, when you cut off programming, when you cut off visitation, when you lock people in their tiny cages for longer and longer periods each day. And when those days stretch into weeks and those weeks stretch into months, and my God, who knows if those months are going to be stretching into years, you have to wonder how much too much can one bear? Like B says, what is the breaking point? And Danny, to your point, you know, that boiling, it's happening.
My name is Ritika. I'm 58 years old from Cambodia. In 1996, I came to prison with 2 consecutive life sentences. I have to serve again. My name is Ritika. I'm 58 years old from Cambodia. In 1996, I came to prison with 2 consecutive life sentences. I have to serve the minimum of 60 years before I'm eligible for parole. Sitting in a maximum security prison in Oak Park Heights, half a world away from home, I was consumed by the sense of hopelessness and helplessness. I began to question my existence. I constantly look in the mirror and ask myself, who am I? Why am I here? Will I be of any use to God or man again? I was in and out of the mental health unit for suicide contemplation. A man who had seen the good side of me in the community came to see me. He told me that I didn't have to kill myself and that I could still find meaning and purpose in prison. After all, he said, you are still human. I told him, you don't understand. There's no meaning here. This is a bad place. People are bad. The system is bad. He said, if you don't like the environment you are in, you can start a process of change by living up to the values that you want to see in others. If you want others to be honest, you have to be honest. You set the example and invite others to follow. How will I survive? I answered. He said, I had to do better. Instead of trying to survive, which I had done all my life, this time I had to do what is right. The moral crisis made us change what we would not do on our own. If we failed, we changed. It kept coming back harder each time. It takes what it takes to learn our lesson, he said. It might take a life sentence, even death. When I told him that people would hate me, his reply was, that's the mountain you have to climb. I came all the way from Cambodia to America with dreams and goals. I asked my mentor, what stands between me and my dreams? How did I end up committing such despicable crimes? It's called character flaws, he said. I thought I had the strongest character because I had survived decades of human atrocity. I grew up in war and genocide, in which I learned that truth doesn't set you free. Honesty is betrayed and killed. Me first, us versus them. Fight or flight, other way of life. That April day of 1975, the Khmer Rouge soldier drove many residents into the countryside to be forced into slave labor. During this exodus, I was separated from my family for 2 days. While being held hostage, I witnessed multiple killings. The Khmer Rouge regime abolished education. They killed educated people and promoted uneducated peasants to leadership. Schools were turned into prisons. Books were burned. School-age children were taken from families and put in labor camps. I was 13 years old. I cannot forget the trauma of seeing my own physical image in a mirror 1 year after I was removed from my family. I was going through sickness, starvation, and long hours of hard labor. Grooming would identify one as a bourgeoisie. Having a mirror would certainly invite that. One day, as I trekked from work through the Curated headquarters, I passed by a full-size mirror. I stole a glance at the mirror, and I could not believe what I saw. I looked around to see if someone else was there, but I was alone. I returned and looked again, and I was haunted by the image in the mirror. I could not recognize anything that resembled who I remember myself to be, a robust, promising youth. The reflected figure was nothing but a skeleton that happened with my every move. Bone protruded from its face. Its eye socket was deep and hollow. Only a strain of hair had the courage to remain standing on its skull. I was only 15 when I was sent to prison for nothing more than who I was, a bourgeoisie. On this prison island, I witnessed countless executions. Having survived tortured interrogations and buried scores of corpses, one day I was ordered to dig my own grave. Although I was afraid of dying, I dug my grave resolutely, just like I did for other corpses. If I didn't do it willingly, the punishment would be death anyway. But if I complied, I preserved a slight chance that my executioner would see my unwavering loyalty to Ongar. He might have a change of heart and spare my life at the last minute. It could also have been a test of loyalty as had been rumored. I had to suppress the thought of landing my hole on my executioner's head and make it his grave instead. It could have easily been done since it was sitting within striking distance. Shifting his cigarette from one side of his mouth to the other, he was preoccupied with what I was doing and what he would do to me, while oblivious to the possibility of his own death. My thought of fighting back and running tormented me more than the thought of dying willingly. But I had no place to run, and I would put my family in danger. After I finished the digging, he said, "Now God trusts you. You are to be released back to your unit. Remember, don't say or think of what you have seen and done here, or you will be buried in this grave you have just dug. It is waiting for your mistake." I kept this promise for life. In 1979, I was 17. The Khmer Rouge fell. I didn't return to the same family I left 4 years earlier. 5 people in my household had been executed. Those who survived had been severely traumatized. 3 years later, my 2 young brothers and I fled the country in search for education. Unfortunately, while in the refugee camp in Thailand, we lost one brother to suicide. It took me 5 years and my brother 8 years to find freedom in America, only to discover that after we had found the opportunity to study, we had lost the ability to concentrate and dropped every class I paid for. Soon after I arrived in prison, I discovered I had been diagnosed with PTSD. I was devastated to realize that in addition to my culpability, life sentences, and moral crisis, I was also crazy. If the symptoms of mental illness were removed from my life, wouldn't I be reduced to nothing? I was so afraid to discover who I really was. At the same time, PTSD humbled me with great insight. I was awestruck by how someone else could know so accurately what was going on in my head. when I myself didn't know how to explain it. My PTSD helped me connect all the dots of what many people had said to me, of patterns of my self-destructive behavior, and of many unexplainable incidents throughout my life. Suddenly I realized that the world is beautiful and I was wrong. I would do anything to remain part of this beautiful world. I pondered hard on how I could find meaning in this prison environment that appeared meaningless. I must find a way to be useful to others. I remember sharing a pot with 3 young men in the county jail. None of them could write. They asked me to help them write to their family. In prison, I also recognized the relation between illiteracy and violence, the same way I saw in the Khmer Rouge genocide. I thought I could get education and become a teacher in prison. After all, I fled my country in search for education. By helping my fellow prisoners become better individuals, to prepare for their successful return to the society, even if I would never see the light of freedom again. Each time one of them was released, I could feel a part of me with them. The greatest injustice the Khmer Rouge inflicted on me is not what they had physically done to me, but the fear and shame they had incubated in my mind. Specifically, when I was made to dig my own grave and promised not to talk about their crime against humanity. Not until a few decades later, when I came to prison, did I realize that the greatest injury was what I had done to myself. I complied. For decades, I had not found the courage to tell my story. I avoid the pain of Khmer Rouge's story by stumbling through life, moving from tragedy to tragedy, until I landed in prison, where I was faced with this hostility that triggered my past. Okay.
Go ahead.
My cell is measured 6 by 9 feet and is about 8 feet in height. It is blocked by 3 concrete walls and iron bar fronts. The walls and bar are painted white. The floor is gray. If I were 6 feet tall, stood in the middle of my cell and spread my arms, I would touch both side walls with the tips of my fingers. There's a fluorescent light on the ceiling with a switch on the wall above the counter. Switched to the back walls are toilet seat, sink, mirror, and hygiene item shelves. They are all made of stainless steel. There are 3 suicide-proof hooks below the shelf and 2 foot lockers under the bed to hold clothes. There's a counter 1 1/2 by 5 feet, also stainless steel, attached to one of the side walls. The bed is 2 feet and a half by 6, attached to the opposite wall. There's a TV shelf connected to the far end of the bed. To watch TV, you have to lie on the bed with your head toward the bar, which is not safe for most prisoners. I am comfortable doing it because I don't have enemies. There's a 3 by 3 gray area on the wall above the bed to post pictures, which cannot be posted any other place. People post pictures of their families and some women pictures that are not their relatives. Some talk to pictures on the wall frequently. I don't have any pictures on my walls. Thinking of family or women only make me sad. There's a space on the floor between the bed and the counter, about 2 by 7 feet, where I spend 1 to 2 hours every day pacing back and forth to keep my glucose and anxiety at their healthy level. 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn. 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 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn.
We have one piece left to share with you. Before we do, I just wanted to give a big thank you to all the artists that are involved. Jeff, B, Sarith, Danny, Carl, Korina, and Ritika, and Emily Baxter at We Are All Criminals and the Weisman Art Museum. Thank you so much for ensuring that these artistic voices are heard, especially under the restrictions that take place, and even more during this pandemic. Finally, we'd like to share a 15-minute snippet of a larger conversation that Jeff and Korina had. Now, this is just a small part of a larger podcast series that they'll be releasing. With Jeff and Korina and with all of the artists, again, these projects are just part of larger projects that will be unveiled. We really encourage you to please follow them as individual artists, follow what We Are All Criminals are doing, and follow the Weisman Art Museum for when those larger projects are going to be unveiled. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Hello?
Hello. This is a prepaid debit call from an inmate at the Minnesota Department of Corrections, Stillwater Correctional Facility. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, hang up or press 1. To prevent calls from this facility, press 9. This call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using GTL.
After the darkest night always comes a brighter day. I am 5. I am inspired. I want to be more like the man you are not. I want children and women to feel comfortable with my presence. I am 5. Impressionable. I am told you are a man, age 35. What I am supposed to be in the process of becoming. Storms are all you bring to your relationships. I am 5. You don't see me. Angry eyes blind you to innocence and fear. I'm afraid to see your storms, to feel your seismic waves ripple our home's foundation. I am now age 25, no longer afraid of masculine storms. I am my own weatherable system, one that evaporates chaos, brings the peace of rising suns and morning bird songs to families. My darkness is reserved for men like you.
Hello. Bonjour, hello all. This is Korina Berry. Thank you for tuning into today's conversation. This project is brought to you through a partnership between We Are All Criminals, the Weisman Art Museum, and the Cedar Cultural Center. This collaboration connects artists currently residing at Minnesota's Stillwater Correctional Facility with other community artists. We wanted to start by letting you know a little bit about how we are connecting. Jeff and I are collaborating together for this project, and we connect primarily by phone and through email. We record our phone conversations, which are limited to 15 minutes, using a laptop and a cell phone. For this conversation, we will be focusing on childhood trauma and what this has meant and looked like in our lives. Hi, Jeff. Can you introduce yourself and share a little bit about how trauma has shown up in your life and how it has impacted your journey?
Yes, thanks, Korina. So, I came into this project through my participation in the Minnesota Prison Writers Project, and it's kind of a way I've invested some of my time in prison. And I've been incarcerated for 18 years now. I was sentenced to a life crossing the death of a man who was dating my cousin. Before that, I worked as a junior high school teacher and independent living skills counselor for youth in the foster care system. And that desire, comes with that job, that desire to be engaged in my community. That's something that stayed with me throughout my incarceration. So while in prison, along with the writing program stuff that I did, and other programs, I just learned a lot from other prisoners. And that kind of gives me a really significant understanding of trauma and how it can affect people and the choices that we make later in life. And in learning that about myself, and the things that contributed to my choice, that brought me here, I developed empathy and wisdom to respond to others in just a more responsible way. And I think that for institutions, it's kind of to have a greater awareness of the value of trauma-informed responses. That's something that can benefit everyone. In my case, the main issue, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that played a role in some of my choices is my observation of domestic violence beginning at a young age. And so I came across, some statistics. I think it was New York Times, maybe the Star Tribune, that reported more than 5 million children witness domestic violence each year. And I think a quarter of the domestic violence homicides in Minnesota back in 2017, and a quarter of those minor children were either present at the time of the homicide or they actually discovered the victim's body. And so it's definitely a serious and prevalent issue. And in my youth and seeing a lot of domestic violence, I kind of got a real sense of shame. I never helped out. I was a kid that would stay in the corner and just kind of be afraid of what was going on. And just as getting older, just started to feel some kind of way about not defending the women in my family, and kind of felt helpless when police might come and not do anything, or when the court system would fail to protect us in some way. The same events would happen over and over again. Kind of begin to feel a sense of anxiousness and unease when any adult men came around, either drinking or just were loud and aggressive. And so all of that, I just started making me develop a real stagnant view or static view of men who mattered. So, I just felt like those were people that had no desire to change. They were evil, like just monsters, and kind of doing to them, I dehumanized them. So in the same way that prisons are dehumanized, and I kind of believe they deserve 100 times more than what they dished out. And so, I don't want to come off like I'm making excuses for committing acts of violence or other crimes. I want to acknowledge that, regardless of my childhood trauma, I had multiple choices in my situation, and I just made one that, resulted in grave harm in my imprisonment. But I do want to say that choices aren't made in a vacuum, and they're all made in context and influence. And if those things are looked at, I think it, can really result in some real effective strategies to help society. And I recognize trauma can affect people differently. It can help people make some poor decisions. It may contribute to people doing some really great things in life as well. And so I know, like in some of your examples, Korina, in your life, some things that led to you doing some really positive things. You want to kind of share a little bit more about you and the experiences and your thoughts on childhood trauma?
Absolutely. Well, and thank you, Jeff, for your words and sharing more about your experiences as a child and how those experiences have impacted you throughout life so far. And hello again to our listeners, and my name is Korina Berry. I am an Anishinaabe from the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. I was born and raised in South Minneapolis, here in Minnesota. And growing up, I grew up cross in between too many homes to count, experiencing domestic violence, addiction, housing instability, as I said, juvenile justice involvement, parental incarceration, and child welfare systems involvement. And these experiences, I feel, are important to remind folks were preceded by centuries of genocide, oppression, and violence against my people and the land. And I carry then within my DNA generations of both trauma and resilience. And from my experiences as a child and as an adolescent really led to my career as a social worker and as a social worker working in the field of child welfare. Growing up, my siblings and I, we experienced many stays at St. Joe's Shelter, which many folks in Minnesota know about St. Joe's, have relatives who have, had children, involved and experienced St. Joe's Shelter. But St. Joe's has long been the entry point for child protection for many families, and multiple of my siblings have aged out of foster care. And one of my siblings I was disconnected from for over 10 years. And that's really impacted our relationship to this day and being able to know and love each other. And for me, and with all these experiences during adolescence, I really struggled. I acted out. I got in lots of trouble. I was also angry and didn't know how to talk through or navigate all those feelings I was experiencing while both my father was incarcerated and my mom was incarcerated and living on the streets and struggling with addiction. And I too became involved in the juvenile justice system then, where I narrowly escaped the school to prison pipeline myself. And so while our experiences as young ones were really challenging, I believe that the systems that intruded and intervened in our lives really perpetuated more violence against and caused more trauma for our family than they helped. And for Minnesota, for folks who don't know, we have the worst disparities for removing children of color from their homes. In our state, American Indian children are 18.2 times more likely to experience foster care than white children. And African American children are more than 2.9 times likely to experience foster care than white children. And so the foster care system has really functioned as a modern day boarding school. They're forcefully separating children from their families, their communities, and their culture. And more often than not, families are being punished in the system due to poverty-related circumstances. They're without food, without safe and stable housing, without other necessary resources to navigate and live healthy lives. More often than not, cases involved in child protection are classified as neglect, which is really like a catch-all phrase and a catch-all statute in our laws. It's not always the egregious harm cases people might think of physical abuse and sexual abuse. It's more often that we just have families and community members that need more support. And our systems, they weren't built for us and weren't really truly built in the way to support families in the way we need. So that's how my life has been shaped in many ways. And Jeff, and we've shared some of the challenging experiences we've both had and how these experiences have shaped or how they have impacted our lives and even into adulthood. And so I also think about healing and how important it is to break cycles and how we create new patterns and hopefully creating ultimately healthier futures for future generations. And so I'm wondering if you could share if healing has begun for you, and if so, what has that healing looked like?
It took a while. My first 8 years in prison, I just kind of came in still angry and still had this righteous belief, but I ended up taking or co-facilitate now class called Restorative Justice, and part of that philosophy of restorative justice is to focus on addressing the needs of people harmed by crime. And one of those needs is information. People who have experienced harm need to know why. Why them, why their loved ones, what would make somebody do this. And, well, for the trauma I experienced as a child, like I said earlier, I thought I knew why. They were just monsters. But once I got into my incarceration for a while, I participated in a domestic violence class. And for the first time, because there was no women around, I believed in men who expressed shame and remorse for for their youth of behavior were telling the truth. They didn't have anybody to impress. So, and I listened to their stories of their childhood, to their belief systems and how they developed. And so rather than, always seeing them as monsters, I begin to see them as flawed humans with a soul that still possess some type of value. And with the more sophisticated understanding, I could begin to, want to help them rather than just, destroy them. And so developing empathy and it helped to, change how my approach was from not just from hate and judgment, but just a belief in their potential future and to be better men. But it wasn't always, it's not even now, it's not, like, okay, I'm just healed. It's kind of a broken road. There are days where it's hard on me, but at least I have that information in my head now to pull myself back and think and, remind myself of potential in all people. Kind of sure, your healing has been a process like that as well. Kind of share what that's been like.
Yeah, for me, it's been a journey. I believed at one point that going and becoming a social worker and working in the field of child welfare, even though I knew it would be challenging, I thought that could be healing and that I could get in and change the system from the inside. And that was really hard. These systems are brutal and they're really hard to reform. And I think we really have to be looking at how we dismantle and we create new systems that actually maybe are not systems at all, that they're villages within our community and how we take care and show up for each other. And so that's work I continue to challenge myself with and try to navigate. And then my personal life healing for me has really included working to repair my relationship with my mother, who's been working to heal herself, which, is creating space for us to do that repair work together. Sadly, my father's passed on, but there was healing work for us too. I've also been reconnecting with siblings in many ways throughout the years, spending lots of time with my nieces and nephews. There are many of them, and that is always healing. And I would also say, my reconnection to the land through urban gardening and being able to harvest food for family and community has been incredibly healing. I think every day trying to speak my language a little bit, participating in ceremony, and really just the incredible power, love, and wisdom of all of the women in my life, from our elders to the little ones, that has also been really healing for me. And, it's an everyday commitment. It's therapy. It's so many things. And so I look forward to, seeing how this healing continues and how it continues to evolve and take shape, and also how it impacts, future generations in my family and in our community. Was there anything else you want to add, Jeff?
Well, I just connected with when you were saying how it was really challenging to go into the system that kind of was responsible in some way for harm towards you, and how that was a challenge you to work through. And I just recognized the question someone asked me before when talking about the police and their response.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Communities and challenging or go into the police system, and how do you change that? So I recognize that the struggle to be a part of the system to try to change it, but it's the same system that was causing harm. But definitely commend for taking that on.
Absolutely. And this is there's so much more we can dig into, and that we'll be able to, and I look forward to digging more in this conversation around all of these things, around childhood trauma and systems response, and how we change systems or how we dismantle systems, and how we do that healing work. I think these are really important conversations for us to continue, and I'm appreciative that we can have those conversations together as well.
Yeah, me too. I'm definitely looking forward to getting into trying to help out with making better ideas for responses to or being trauma-informed responses.
Absolutely. I think that's an incredibly important point.
Thank you for using GTL.
Can you hear that? The not silence, shaking of the air, the great of too many men contained in cramped quarters, voice over voice as necks stretch and heads tip back in this feral nest, expecting to be fed or nurtured or shown the ritual of flight. You don't know noise until nerves sizzle and shock the body into short circuit. How much, too much, can you bear? The loudspeaker's constant God voice, the late night, early light, pill-spiked grievance fevers of cooped spook birds, the prison's dumb metal percussion drunk, the bangs, clangs, groaning bones, moans and walls and throats in the wind and its baggage. And goddamn it, shut the fuck up. Figure fatigue of tongue would set in at some point. Enough for this poem to reach its final plea. Instead of rapture, a private field's pastoral hush.